Will I?
Sure. You're recording, so whenever you do your front back, you can roll.
Well, it looks like all 22 of you have arrived.
Perfect.
Hi! Welcome to DerbyCon.
Woo!
It's the talk at 8 o'clock at night. Apparently some other credentialed people are having a conversation and therefore don't want to hear my awesome conversation. That just makes them credentialed people. What? There's 35 seats here. Here. So, standard disclaimer comes off the top of every conversation to make sure everybody understands. I'm notionally employed. I'm not authorized to speak for anyone. Blame the voices in your own head for your own problems. It's probably wind turbines. Given that I know every single person in this room, you don't need to hear about my credentials. I've been doing this shit for a long time, whether it's operations management, consultant, auditor, researcher, analyst, utilities, financials. At this point, I've done enough that I'm having trouble finding new and interesting challenges. Hang out with Liquid Matrix because we've got the best security podcast available right now. Hackerspaces are cool, and I'm Canadian. Not an expert at anything. So a couple of years ago, I went to Denver. Anybody been to Denver? Anybody tried to climb stairs in Denver? Anybody fall downstairs in Denver because they tried to climb stairs in Denver? Yeah. I did a talk at a energy conference, which I really think I should do not at an energy conference because these jokes are awesome. It was a pretty good audience that understand that ultimately what your life is about is getting to the point where you can use a broom to silence the alarms on your security system from home in a moo-moo. You don't need a VPN for that. It's okay. Doing this talk at a industry event, like, this is the energy industry, this is pipeline and power people, and having most of the audience not understand the depth and severity of the problem and didn't get the really sad black humor that comes from the fact that you can do operations if all you know how to do is use a broom. If you haven't seen this episode, it's awesome. He also silences alarms by using one of those ether birds. This turned pretty rapidly into nothing but disillusionment. So this would be 2010 for those of us that can't do math. And I sat down and had a conversation with, of all people, Jericho. Strongly recommended to not have conversations with Jericho when you are feeling disillusioned. It does not get better. If you are offended, this part's going to suck for you. About 25 minutes of making offense and nothing but. Let's measure life in a decade, shall we? Can anybody remember 10 years ago? Got a couple of people, faint memories. Most of you seem to be in some sort of alcohol-induced haze. There was this company that brought out this music player that had a lot of flaws that everybody thought was going to be stupid, and there's a couple things that it didn't do really well. If you'd bought one of these, you'd know that you were cool. October 23rd, 2001, it was an awesome day. You were really cool. If you'd taken the money and bought Apple stock on that day, you would be lighting a cigar with a $100 bill and laughing at all of us. Never, ever, ever take and do that calculation. If I'd spent the money I bought Apple gear with on buying Apple stock, how much money would I have today? Does not work out well. My life was a little different. Consumption of my time was much more around things like, this is how to eat, honey. Belligerent tweens were a big part of my life. Say hello to the belligerent tween in the audience. Had an excellent couple of days, almost a week, sitting, enjoying the summer sun. Thankful, and much more thankful as I think about it year over year, that it wasn't the February 2003 blackout. Everybody knows what happens when you have the August 2003 blackout in February.
Lots of blankets.
Human sickles. I was really pumped because Urgent Action Standard 1200 had come out. We were going to do cyber security on the power grid. We were going to know that it was going to be awesome because it was both urgent and action. I spent a lot of time with flaws in Java, needing to use a specific version of Java in order to get the goddamn gauntlet front end to load. I have my NAI grant number tattooed on my arm from all the time I spent on tech support with them. Finding out years later it was probably Dave Mortman I was talking to. Anybody from the past remembers the absolute anguish of getting your Cyrix 266 megahertz machine with half a meg of RAM to, yeah. There was this really awesome operating system, had a great UI. Someday real soon you'll be able to pay $5 extra to get your start button back. The problems that we were dealing with were simple, single packet problems. There was nothing difficult about it. It was a simple single packet problem. We don't have any of this app complexity. That was a decade ago. How much of that is familiar? Not because it was a decade ago, because you were dealing with it last week. Lots of this happened. In 2010, I'm sitting in a restaurant. Jericho's making me feel like an idiot, which is not because he's necessarily humongously smarter than I am. He's just very, very good at finding that point and helping you understand just how out of touch you are. It's awesome. And I was thinking about when I got into critical infrastructure. There's a lot of critical infrastructure in this talk, so you'll have to put up with that. I spent a long time as a consultant, and I did a lot of critical infrastructure consulting, and then I got full-time employment in critical infrastructure. And it was altruistic. It was like joining the Peace Corps. I was going to help. And I was taken down to the loading dock, literally taken down to the loading dock, and I had the world explained to me. We got a good thing going on, don't rock the boat. And that first day, that first morning, defined my experience in critical infrastructure. Will help you all understand why I left working in critical infrastructure, and why all of you should, if you live where precipitation falls in solid form, ensure that you have your own way of heating your people. Because that's the best they've got. Mired, absolutely mired in deceit. When you talk to critical infrastructure asset owners, they talk about their stakeholders. This is one of those MBA terms that it's MBA douche, period. The stakeholders, the people that are really important to them are, if they're a corporation, shareholders. If they're a branch of the government, people who won popularity contests based solely on their ability to lie convincingly. They talk about adjacent asset owners, so other corporations or other branches of the government that are dependent upon them. They never seem to manage to get down to the point where they talk about ratepayers or people. The reason that it's critical infrastructure is because people are reliant on it. You're in an organization where you got nothing. Senior management says, we are going to adhere to Urgent Action Standard 1200, which later got called 1300 and later got called NERC-CIP. Everybody who calls it NERC-CIP makes me giggle. That would be only people in the InfoSec industry and the IT industry. The people in the energy industry that call it that make me giggle even harder because they always call it cyber-CIP. you're going to fail. And it doesn't matter whether it's senior management or that you thought by publishing a plan and adhering to the plan you were going to get there, you're going to fail, and it's your fault. You were stupid enough to think that it was going to go your way. You thought you were working with adults. What a horrifying, fucked up mistake to make. They don't want to do it right. In fact, the less they can do, the better. It's your fault too. This causes, in most organizations that have regulatory requirements laid upon them, something that I call malicious compliance. They are absolutely compliant with the words. You want to know the really cool thing about NERC CIP? Do you know who ratifies NERC CIP? Okay, does everyone know who NERC is? So the organization is responsible for ensuring the sanctity of the power grid in North America. And remember that imaginary dotted lines in the minds of people who won popularity contests by lying do not exist in the real world. The imaginary dotted line is not there. The power grid in New York State gets really screwed over if Ontario gets screwed over, okay? So it's North America. The people who ratify the rules, the people who say this is the rule and this is the way it shall be done, hands up who thinks it's the government. A treaty between two governments. The authorities, the ones who make the decisions on how much power needs to be generated to be sent somewhere. The people who own the assets that need to be protected. Their CEOs, COOs, and CFOs. Are they going to build you a set of rules that is functional? Who's the stakeholder in the power grid north of that invisible line where an inch of snow causes the city to shut down for a month or causes people to go about their daily lives? In fact, there's a whole group that is specifically tasked with mapping legal, regulatory, or corporate requirements against the rules to make sure that they're adhering to the letter of the rules. Choosing the least effective way to do it, the cheapest, because remember, it's all about the dollars, and the one that requires the least change, because change is scary. We do things the way we did them last year because that's less scary. This is how humanity has gone from enjoying meat in caves to enjoying processed meat product in upholstered caves. Then this shit happens. If you guys play the drinking game, you are screwed for the next 15 slides. We can't avoid this. This is the word that has been latched onto. It's the wrong word. It's kind of like the word security. If you're in power systems, the word security doesn't mean what we use it for. It means, is there enough generation capacity for the next second? Is the grid secure? Not, is the grid secure? So you can see how the conversation derails immediately, and that's why they call it. Who's drinking? Come on! You guys thought this was a game. It's not a game. This is an extra 4 drinks. Because it's persistent, you know. Every now and then, keynote is completely awesome. So we're stuck with this. And the part that is the most unentertaining is that it continues. Every time you turn around. The creepy look on the face. This is an official portrait.
Oh, wow.
It's got
Cyber means something completely different for him.
I want to be one of these guys. The problem with all of this is really simple. You know, we're in InfoSec and we've got our way of doing things, and we're pretty opinionated about how this is all done. And what we think of as cyber weapons are not what they think of as cyber weapons. It's just the way of life for us. So this specific deceit, this specific failure to understand what's being done by whom and when, see, I told you wanted to sit in front, is agonizing, painful, stupid, ridiculous, awful in every single way.
Oh, dude, that's just so wrong. That's just so wrong.
What this leads to is a feeling of abject deficiency.
Only in your case. I'm sorry.
No, because I was smart enough to close the laptop and go. We have this thing that we call best practice. How many people love best practices? How many people really do this? How many people are guilty of this? How many people let this happen? Yeah. You know, you think about in the organization, most organizations have something, the legal term is usually something like organizational sign-a register. Who has the ability to sign off financially for the organization? At what level? What are your limits? What are the conditions? How come we don't have that for this stuff? How come Bob in marketing gets to make decisions about which organization he outsources the marketing website to? Organization that asks you on the phone later to define what cross-site scripting means?
No.
How many people have been professionally serviced? How many people professionally service? Yeah.
It's more accurate.
It's in critical infrastructure, finding current systems is sometimes difficult. In most critical infrastructure organizations, there's someone whose responsibility daily is to search eBay for spare parts. You wouldn't believe some of the operating systems that are still in daily use that you are critically reliant on. Digital Equipment Corporation might be dead in real life. They're very alive in critical infrastructure data centers. How prepared do you think we need to be? I guess is a big question. How many people have ever been involved in business continuity planning? Not necessarily the exercise, but the planning part of it. What's important, right? Sometimes you get really well-planned BCP, where the $40,000 rack, list price, let's say Brown and Boveri, $40,000 rack, isn't populated, where you're working in the power industry and the circuit panels are blocked with boxes of shit. Where you have inventory, because you work in a furniture store. Nothing like high quality, well-loomed wiring. You know there's not going to be a single crimp. All of those cables are going to work perfectly when you need them to.
Yep.
Doesn't get better than that. The backup data center uses Linksys switches. Primary data center uses Cisco Catalyst. Backup data center uses Linksys, which is a Cisco brand. Spares are available for all kinds of things. Whatever you need spares for, you have. You need a chair? We got those. I heard somebody say recently that war dialing was passé. There was no reason to do war dialing when you're doing a pen test because you're never going to find anything. PC Anywhere version 4 on a 14.4.28 modem is very common. Unauthenticated PC Anywhere on a modem is very common. Being able to just sit down and work is hard when there's no chairs. You just had to look in the right place to find all the chairs. This is what happens when you're Milton and working in critical infrastructure. And here's the documentation so that you know you're going to be able to do what you need to do. Milton's bookcases were empty. You also hit a lot of design flaws. And it's fun to talk about design flaws in the real world. And so we're going to talk about design flaws in the real world. But remember, design flaws happen everywhere where there is a lack of creativity, where there's a lack of thinking about the potential negative outcomes of what you're doing. So you're all looking at this picture going, what the hell is that? Yeah. That's a picture of a janitor slop sink that was installed 35 years ago that used galvanized pipes.
Oh!
35 years of use with galvanized pipes causes a fairly significant amount of corrosion. Sufficient corrosion that the tap set can be blown off by city pressure. So that, I mean, it's kind of troublesome every now and then to have 3/4 of an inch diameter hot and 3/4 of an inch diameter cold coming straight out of the wall at city pressure. Troublesome. Having no adjacent shutoff valve.
Those were the adjacent shutoffs.
Troublesome. Having the janitor's closet located directly above the switching closet.
Oh my God.
Well, you want to stack closets.
Trifecta, baby.
Right? And we actually went back and checked. The switching closet has always been the switching closet. For 35 years, it was originally labeled MMI switching. So MMI is man-machine interface. So this has been switching since they were using mainframes to do this stuff in this building. This critical failure. Remember, the floors got core holes because power lines run between floors. The plumbing runs between floors. The break happened after 5 p.m. InfoSec people work late. So using cardboard and mops, the InfoSec people prevented a blackout of equivalent size to the 2003 blackout. You'll recognize the other unfuzzed things here as Dave Lewis. This is how close you can come to a non-cyber critical incident. It's always that close, always. This was in February. Think about what that means for
Highly skilled labor.
Yeah, well, as it turns out, the biggest problem you're going to face is labor. Working in a unionized IT department is 11-5 kinds of fun. Working in a unionized IT department where you are also unionized as an InfoSec person means that when you accidentally say out loud, dude, you really shouldn't be surfing the porn from your computer at work, means the grievance is filed against you, and you have to go for compassionate communication training. While on leave. Sorry.
That's why I quit InfoSec.
I've had enough grievances filed against me that we don't want to talk about grievances anymore.
The counselors have made quit.
Dealing with a level of protectionism that's insane. The biggest kind of protectionism, of course, is the quote-unquote, I've been doing this job longer than you've been alive kind. which was demonstrably true in several cases. The person who had been doing the job had been doing it longer than I'd been alive. Just because they used to work for Thomas Edison didn't necessarily mean they were qualified to talk about computers. And I've realized as I've aged that there is a certain amount of that. You know, I stand at conferences and I look around and realize that there's some youthful folk in the audience, and I've got kids that are as old as some of these professionals, and yet many of them have really good ideas that I hadn't thought about because my brain didn't work like their brain does. I started using computers when I was around 8 years old. They started using computers when they were around -9 months. It's a different kind of world, a different way of thinking about things. The amount of spite was awesome. Because of things like grievances, I developed a number of bad habits. One of them was posting inspirational quotes on my cubicle. Like, burnout, my mood is inflammatory. Things like, if you connect the virtual world with the physical world, you gain the liabilities of both. I often had my cubicle ransacked. And the you can't do that. The you can't do that was probably the most awesome, because one of the things that I would do quite regularly in the you can't do that category is sit at my desk and use one of the machines that was in the QA lab. So human interface to grid control in a QA lab, and I was using it from my desk because I knew how to use VNC, even though it was on port 5901. I hacked it. Authentication was, do you know which port it's on? I'm not going to tell you which port the production systems were on.
5902?
No. 5901 was for QA, 5900 was for production.
Right. Same port.
Blind adherence to a set of rules laid down by men, especially chunky white guys. We're bad at this. We've been bad at it for 2,000 years. I went in search of a very simple solution to all this. I needed to find a way then, a couple times in between, and certainly sitting there at that table in 2010, I needed to find a way to make this okay. Because it wasn't okay. It was ridiculous that 10 years later we're doing the same shit. And if anybody thinks it's okay to be doing the same thing 10 years later, you wouldn't be here. You would be talking with the ISC squared people. I went in search of the Renaissance. Somewhere, somehow, someone must have managed to maintain some sanity. From the days when we built firewalls using the TIS toolkit, when every firewall was proxy, when outbound rules were not a separate product called DLP. We just called them outbound firewall rules. Stupid us. You start digging in the history looking for this stuff. Some of you may know that I've done some work with the cloud and the auditing of the cloud. The most intriguing part about the cloud and auditing the cloud is that some of the best documentation on how to audit the cloud was written in the 60s. It's called How to Audit Your Service Bureau. Textbooks, AICPA, from the 60s, will tell you how to audit the cloud. We didn't have to invent anything. All we had to do was take it from the molding paper and put it into the electronics. And that's it. Because it's a solved problem. It's a done problem. How many other problems are we fighting that are exactly the same?
Many.
How many other
All of them.
researchers aren't going to a library to do some research? How many cross-site scripting talks have you been to?
9001.
How many of them have said something other than don't do cross-site scripting? How many of them told you how to fix cross-site scripting in a 10-year-old legacy application that runs on server-side JavaScript on Netscape server on Solaris for Spark? Still in production. It's a critical app. Who's going to rewrite that? Who wants to rewrite server-side JavaScript into anything else? Hands up. Who loves JavaScript that much? Who even knows that there is such a thing as server-side JavaScript? 4 or 5 of you. Isn't that awesome? So,
Not proud of that.
oh, you're not proud? Oh, because you had that look on your face like, oh, I also know COBOL.
RPG.
Yeah. You know what? Actually, I had an RPG AS400 argument with somebody a couple of weeks ago. It's like, you can't do that! And like, dude, I was doing that in the 80s. It really hasn't changed that much. Hello.
Punch cards.
You know, my first software development job was on punch cards.
How old are you?
It was I'm a very old man who looks young. It was between grade 1 and grade 2. I went to summer camp at the university, and the VT 100s and 52s were far too advanced for us to use. We got to play Trek one afternoon for 15 minutes. Otherwise, we did our work on punch cards. Wow. Yeah. So, pattern for success. You could be Richard Kimball. It was the one-armed man. Show me the one-armed man. It's almost facile to say it, but pointing at something and saying, not my fault, is only useful when it is actually not your fault. Passwords are hard. Passwords are not a good solution to auth n auth z. You're in InfoSec. A decade later, that one's on you. You can take the route taken by 8-year-old boys. Wasn't me. The 8-year-old boy shaped Nutella handprint on the light blue wall was probably the 8-year-old boy. Probably not Kat, definitely not Mom. But, I mean, maybe that's an out you want to take. Wasn't me. I'm 8. By the way, this is my 8-year-old son. He's kind of awesome. This is what we're doing as an industry. The people who didn't come here because they had to go to ISC squared are doing this because they're not solving the problem. The solution to the problem is tear up your CISSP, and when ISC squared goes bust next year because they're a proselytizing organization, it's the Scientology problem. They exist so that they can exist. And the only way they can exist is by getting the next member through the door. When has ISC squared done anything for you? When have they done anything for their purported constituents? I got a dare for you, just because I want to see what happens. Non-scientific poll. I've done it and I know what my results are, but non-scientific poll. Call the ISC squared and ask them if this person is legitimately a CISSP. I need to know before I hire Bob Evans that he's a CISSP. They won't disclose. Has this CISSP ever had a ethical violation held against them? You can call the, whatever it's called where you are, for me it's the College of Physicians and Surgeons, and say, has this doctor ever had something filed against them? And they'll answer you right away, damn fast. There's a website that has it. You can do that with accountants, lawyers, engineers, other professionals. This is what everybody's doing right now. Heaven forbid there should be an executive order on cybersecurity. We all need to vote on it. Remember creepy cyber congressman? He's going to save you. Anybody who won a popularity contest based on who can lie most effectively? Yeah. So let's actually do something. In life, you start with 12-step plans. They seem to work for some people. We're InfoSec and we are unbelievably lazy, so we're going to have to reduce that number of steps to make sure we can get to the end. Let's try a 9-step plan. Step 1, admit the problem. Remember what Einstein said about insanity being doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result? A decade later, we're still pissing and moaning about Java vulnerabilities. A decade later, we still have crappy interfaces to our security tools. How many security tools can you think of that give you a way to generate a CSR without going to their command line? Well, that's a shocking silence, isn't it? We can't do our own shit well, which means there's a problem. And a decade later, it's still a problem. And the biggest part of it is it's on us. Complex passwords. Yeehaw. Explain complex passwords to your grandfather. The XKCD cursor, exactly. Yeah. How do you get to a point where it's been okay for us to be the assholes who say no? Business comes and says, I'd like to, no. InfoSec says no. How is it that it's okay to perpetuate bad architecture decisions? We've known for how long that the perimeter doesn't work? How about your much vaunted perimeter that includes laptops that go in and go out every single freaking day? That's the Stuxnet perimeter. We're fighting the same problems, only we're not fighting them. There's this idea that InfoSec people are largely, if not totally, interrupt driven. A good day is one where you're really valuable because there's been a lineup at your cubicle. It's awesome. I had 15 problems today. We perpetuate the emergency because we like it. It's great that we keep having simple, stupid shit go wrong. We build architectures that are bad. We don't move on to new ideas because, oh my God, new is scary. It's a lot on us. But we like to be needed, so that's why we're complicit, right? Ethics. There's people in another room that should be talking about ethics and what ethical violation looks like, and they're probably not. When you do your job, how often do you find yourself doing something that you know is wrong? You know it's wrong. Yeah. I actually quit a job because what I was doing was wrong and I was being asked to do wrong things over and over and over again. And there's nothing quite as fulfilling as writing your resignation letter to HR and saying, due to repeated ethics violations which have been reported to appropriate authorities. Being required to commit ethical violations. You know what I'm talking about. That's why you quit too, I think. We need some self-respect because we're looking dumber and dumber. I mean, it's funny to have the shirt that says with stupid, only with the arrow pointing up. I think that should be the con shirt because we've had the summer of breaches. I mean, to the point where Liquid Matrix has a separate breach tracking sheet because we can't keep up with them. I was in a bookstore. I'm not sure if you guys still have bookstores in this country. I think you've just got Amazon, right? So look it up on Amazon. But I was in a bookstore, and in the shelf section where they have the books that you're allowed to write in, you know, the journals and the tell me about your garden and this is why I feel bad. There's a book that's called My Password Book. Because that's the best solution we have. The best solution we have for people who are not super nerds, and let's face it, we're all the kind of people that think it's perfectly okay to have to be the super nerd. Because all of us remember configuring a trumpet windsock and think that's the only way you should be allowed on the internet. How many small businesses have to have their bank accounts emptied because their calculator and record tracker is also the modern day replacement for the slightly porny calendar in the back? This is not okay. And yet we're okay with it. And the liability arguments and the we have to go and sue and this has to turn into a big deal because they used a simple password that they wrote down on a piece of paper that was sitting next to the computer, and none of that really matters anyways because one of their employees is going to the skettiest websites on the internet and keyloggers in and your bank account's empty. All your money's gone. And your money keeps going away. That's the best part. After you report it to your bank, and yet they still allow outbound wire transfers? Awesome. There's not a lot to be okay with in there. But from a self-respect standpoint, the news lately has been the pits. It's what else is not going right? What else? And you know, we shield ourselves. We stand back and say, well, I told you so. And I told you so only works until you're about 7 or 8 years old. And then it turns into, well, it makes you a whiny bitch. That's what it comes down to. It's just, It's the arguments that came out a couple of years ago. I wrote an article for CSO magazine, and I said, I think the iPad is really awesome because it sharply delimits the options and opportunities for general purpose computing. And people are like, you don't understand how the world works, man. And my response was, well, actually, I think the iPad is the VT100. And I think back to the stuff we did on dumb terminals. VT100s with a modem and a crossover cable, and we did some rocket stuff. Most of you will know this stuff as the internet. The internet was developed on something that was less useful and less awesome than an iPad, and yet all we can do is bitch and moan about it. But what it means is, generally speaking, it's okay for my mom to surf the internet. And it's certainly better than the Windows machine she came from. So the way forward has to include things like, we need to be better about that, I don't know, we'll call it the self-congratulatory reach around. Patting ourselves in the back and say, we're awesome, we're proactive. Because we're defining the word proactive as we're reactive faster. And reactive faster is not the same as proactive. We're solving problems after they've occurred. The breaches occur and we close the door. We're good at closing it really fast. But it's also too late. How many people have a Google account? How many people are lying that they don't have a Google account? There we go. How many people have a Google account that also has two-factor auth enabled? It's 1/3 of you. I was at a conference 2 days ago. Funnily enough, it was the Energy Set conference for 2012, and I asked the same question. And the response I got from one person was, well, I tried enabling it, but it broke my email on my iPhone, so I disabled it. And she said, therefore, it's too complicated, stupid, nobody can do it. And I responded and said, well, that's interesting. What you've exhibited is failure to read that big gray box in the middle that says this is how you create application-specific passwords. And, well, let's face it, I mean, he is the cool little kid with the eyebrow up and the little hacker laptop. And if my 8-year-old can configure two-factor auth, there's no reason why 2/3 of you can't do it this afternoon, this evening. I get really mixed up because we started at 1 o'clock this evening. How many of you use security tools on your home networks? That's a larger number than I thought. How many people have two-factor auth on their home networks? Wicked is free, use it. How many people have IDS at home? How many people review logs at home? You want to hear a funny review log story? One time I was reviewing logs and I noticed that there was a HTTP post that shouldn't have been there at that time. It was an authentication post to Liquid Matrix. And I wasn't at home. So who the hell was validly authenticating to Liquid Matrix? And then I checked the post data and it was security intern. 4 months after my wife started as security intern, I finally found out that security intern was my wife because I reviewed logs. So I was only stupid for 4 months. I did really, really well in that last few seconds because I reviewed logs. How many people have things like Security Onion running on their home networks? Sometimes? Yeah. Anything's more than 0? We're at a point now where it's no longer that the software is expensive. You don't need ArcSight to do security information management. You don't need Internet Security Scanner to do meaningful scans, vulnerability scans of your own network. You don't need $60,000 to build security infrastructure. You can just do it for free. And shouldn't you know how to do it anyways? I mean, maybe you're a superstar web app sec type who has a credit card that says bug bounty on it. Maybe you need to know how the stuff that runs under the web application works. Maybe you're somebody like me who remembers when RFC 1149 was not quite as much of a joke as it is now, the IP over AV carrier. You need to know how the higher level stuff works. How do the applications interact? This crazy wacky API thing, how does that work? Everybody's bitching about APIs right now. Anybody else pissed off at Twitter? How does that stuff work? How can you glue these tools together? How can you make what 10 years ago was the sock of your dreams happen for free? I don't know, dog food tastes good sometimes. Anybody here because they need to be recharged? Because the only way they can face work on Monday morning is to be at a security conference where they can talk to their peer group and understand they're not the only ones who are living that particular hell. There was this basketball player one time, pretty famous, you might have heard of him, his name was Mike. And he had this very simple way of helping people understand why he did what he did. He played basketball for the love of the game. Remember when I said I got into InfoSec in critical infrastructure because it was altruistic, it felt good, it was, I'm joining the Peace Corps, I'm gonna make the world a better place, there aren't gonna be any humensicles on my watch. It turned out there were no humensicles on my watch because I was really good with a mop. But for a lot of people, InfoSec is just a job. In fact, the more letters you have after your name, the more likely it is just a job. If you don't love it, GTFO. You know, in the kindest possible way. I'm sure you're a very nice human being. You probably remember to call your mom on her birthday. But if you don't love InfoSec, GTFO. Anybody you work with who doesn't love InfoSec, condemn them to log review and then tell them to GTFO. Somebody needs to review the tripwire logs. Someone does. It shouldn't be you. It should be the person who thinks this is a 9 to 5. Because if you don't love this stuff, you're never going to try and make it better. You're never going to try and do the next best job. And along the way, you need to learn how to talk. So I'm on a couple of selection committees for conferences, and the biggest problem we have is, well, that people like me are still speakers at conferences. I've done this enough. You all should be tired of hearing from me. I certainly have nothing new or interesting to say. Lots of you have really awesome things to say. Lots of you are really bad at communicating. You've got great ideas, but you do your talk like this because this is the only way you understand how to deal with human beings. Or worse, you do your talk like this. We're communicating for success. If you can't deliver a con in a place like this, where we're all a big, giant, happy family, I mean, almost especially at DerbyCon, because if you haven't been hugged, you haven't been here for more than 5 minutes. Dave Kennedy standing at registration desk, okay, here's your badge, here's your bag, here's Dave Kennedy. If you can't communicate here and deal with people who are your peer group, who aren't going to shun you because you talk like this or you read your slides, you're not taking advantage of the opportunity to get better at talking to people who don't like you. Those would be your fellow employees and co-workers and their bosses and your boss. And none of them want to hear from you because you're the person who's been saying no for a decade. But you're going to suck at communicating with them if you can't communicate with us. Not this past summer, but the one before, so that'd be 2011. I offered to run a workshop at DEF CON on communication skills and giving talks for InfoSec people on the Thursday. Guess how many people showed up for that? All right, I got 10, I got 2.
85.
7.
0.
I don't know, showed up, right?
Oh, I was there, prepared, ready. In fact, that whole thing is still on my laptop, ready to go. 8 hours. This is how to talk to your coworkers. This is how to talk to friends, people who hate you, and how to talk to your boss's boss's boss, who's going to be the one that gets you the next job. Nobody showed up.
Tomorrow.
So y'all suck at communication. You need to do better. And if you haven't given a talk at a con, if you haven't even given a fire talk or a stable talk, yeah, something here, you have to be up to this. And yeah, if you haven't done that, you're not doing your job well. And just because you think you don't have anything to say, I spent an hour this afternoon talking to somebody outside, getting all the secondhand smoke I needed, about a particular opportunity for them. And somebody came along and said, you know, suckered onto the conversation for a little while and said, well, that talk's been done. And I said, well, let's count. Major security conferences, so including B-sides, that talk has been done twice since 2007. How many cross-site scripting talks have been done since 2007? 47 million, that's probably about the right number. So, is your point of view different? Yes, because this particular person is intimately involved in this stuff. And just because the talk has been done doesn't mean the good talk has been done. You know, I gave a SCADA talk because I was tired of seeing people who once upon a time saw a Modbus and called it SCADA, because Modbus is not actually ever used in SCADA. It's not a SCADA protocol, it's an ICS-DCS protocol. The SCADA talk needed to be done. This is an opportunity and a time to communicate for success amongst your peers and to learn how to communicate with the people who make the changes. You know, sooner or later, there's going to be an opportunity for you to talk to somebody seriously influential. Are you going to be able to pull it off, or are you going to mumble and look at your feet? And most of all, deal with the fact that we don't do a good job. In fact, we do a terrible job because we think that this is funny. Losers. It's stupid shit. We suck at what we're doing right now because a decade later we're doing the same damn thing. It takes standing up on stage and ranting for an hour to get a con to start admitting defense talks. You're welcome. Why? Because it's about 80-20. 80% of InfoSec people are working on defense, 20% of people are working on offense. And the offensive people generally are, because for them it's, ooh, I made a metasploit, jerk, jerk, splooge. And for the defense people, it's, I can't talk about this really cool thing that I did, because then you'll know how I did what I did to make sure that you can't get me with your metasploit splooge. Defenders have a really hard time. Defense talks wouldn't get accepted to cons. I wrote defense talks from the early 2000s onward. The first defense talk that I got accepted, was ShmooCon last year. 3? Oh, okay, yeah. It's not about necessarily sexy defense. It's certainly not about these guys. It's about doing a really good job of the really important stuff. Don't panic. Just stick with it. I'm around until the end of the con. Please nail me for conversations. Yeah, that's a pretty good summary. Summary of the talk, we don't rock the boat, we got a good thing going on here. That's pretty accurate. I entreat you all to go and do awesome. If you have questions, please ask. Listen to me, because this is going to be my rant du jour for a little while now. But again, thank you all for coming and enjoy DerbyCon. Remember, it's not just the con that hugs, it's the one where the flu gets you.